is Bobby Marks of ESPN. He is our favorite capologist, front office insider. And so in a year like this, and Bobby, you know this, a day does not go by where we don't hear the phrases Golden State Warriors and big game hunting constantly, absolutely constantly. So can you characterize sort of the why and the where that stands right now?
Well, I mean, I think the why is because you're trying to maximize the window of probably one of the greatest players of all time, which is Stephen Curry. I mean, I think that's probably the big reason, the why. Certainly you've kind of fallen to the back of the pack, or maybe the middle of the pack right now, as far as from a roster standpoint. I mean, from a playing standpoint, and where you are in the standings. And I think, to go big game hunting, you have to have, the contracts, the young asset, which would certainly be Jonathan Kuminga, the draft picks, which they certainly do. And then you add all that up and you try to, figure it out in a complex set of rules where a lot of teams are impacted by. So although some players might be available now and some players might be available in a month or two, they're not easy to be attainable.
And if you look at some of the big game they might be hunting, I know you had previously mentioned Zion Williamson as a possible target, and I could see why New Orleans would want to do that. They're having a really down year. They're struggling. What would it take, in your opinion, for the Warriors to give up that would be amenable to New Orleans in a trade for Zion?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned Zion just as listen, there's not many superstar players out there. Certainly Jimmy Butler's name has been out there. Brandon Ingram's out there. I think why I talked about Zion, and I think the only reason for Golden State, if you go down that path, is if you're not giving up much to do that. And it's because it's, based on his injury history and the contract. His contract is one of the great contracts out there because there's no guarantees after this year. It's non-guaranteed for the next 3 years after here. So if you're going out and pursuing him, then there's less of a risk taking him on. Then you're saying, like, well, why would New Orleans do that? And that's right. Like, why would the Pelicans do that where they're not maximizing his value here? So I think Zion would make sense if you're giving up a first round pick and maybe one or two players that match. Not giving up Jonathan Kuminga. Not giving up, probably not even maybe Brandon Podziemski, as far as kind of like, if it's Wiggins and an expiring contract, then that maybe makes a little bit more sense because the risk is not there for you if you're the Warriors.
Okay, I want you to circle back and say that slower for our audience. You're saying that Zion Williamson might be attainable without touching Jonathan Kuminga.
I didn't know. I'm not going there. I'm saying that if you're going to pursue him and the risks that come with it, then you're not going to put a guy like Jonathan Kuminga in a trade.
Got it.
That's kind of that's we listen. Golden State's been linked. Shams said it a week or two ago that they're targeting an all-star, right? Who's an all-star? There's no all-stars out there unless it's Butler and Ingram right now, and I don't know if that makes sense for them. But an all-star that has franchise-type ability when he's on the court. Now, the but comes with when he's on the court, of course, and that's why I don't see teams willing to give up the farm for him because there's no certainty when he will be on the court. There's no certainty that he'll hold up for a 60-game season. That's why I said it's kind of a low risk if you're not willing to give up much for him.
Got it. Okay, and so while you talk about maybe they aren't all-stars, maybe they're just the level below, but you've mentioned Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, Jimmy Butler. Who else might be available that could potentially be interesting to the Warriors?
Yeah, I mean, those are as you mentioned, those are the three. That's when you read the tea leaves right now, that's it right now. I mean, that's kind of what if you're looking at I guess all-star level talent. I'm sure there'll be one or two guys that will shake free in the next in the next month or two and stuff like that. But that's kind of the landscape. Zach LaVine's a name certainly that's been talked about. That's a lot of money to take back. All these guys is a lot of money to take back. Jimmy Butler's making $49 million to go out and trade Jimmy Butler, and we've got a piece going tomorrow. You're going to have to trade 4 players. that's the reality. Maybe even 5 players here to go out and get Zach LaVine. The same thing here. The economics of the CBA does not allow you to go out and try to acquire all-stars. It makes it extremely, extremely difficult, especially where Golden State is financially.
And where they are financially is out of the second apron, but are they in a spot where they have to take back dollar for dollar? Yeah.
Yeah, they're not. Well, I mean, they're not in the first apron, but they're technically in a dollar for dollar position because they're only $330,000 below the first apron. So you can't exceed it no matter what. You can't exceed that threshold no matter what. So that's why it makes it, listen, if you want to go out and say, we want to go out and get Jimmy Butler, okay, we're going to probably trade 4 players. So, you can, whether it be Wiggins or Payton or Looney or Kuminga, and we've got to have enough space to replace those players and take Jimmy Butler back. So that's the challenge that comes with, trying to go after one of those players.
When you think about Jonathan Kuminga, and we here have a mixed bag of opinion among diehard Warrior fans, what does the league think about Jonathan Kuminga and where his game might go and what the open market might command next year when he is a restricted free agent?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think Jalen Johnson in Atlanta got 5 for $150. I think that would be a number I would be fine with for Jonathan Kuminga, maybe even a little bit less. I don't think he's as consistent where Jalen Johnson is right now. Where the market is going to be next summer or this upcoming summer, there's really one team that has significant cap space, and it's the Brooklyn Nets. Everyone else is kind of in a tier 2, 20 to 25. Brooklyn's got a ton of room to go out, and if they wanted to go out and put a whopper of an offer sheet here. So I'm curious, and I'm interested to see certainly more. You kind of want more body of work. I think we'll see that here with Kuminga over the next 4 or 5 months.
Bobby and Bobby Marks, ESPN, is with us here on Willard and Dibs. Bobby, is it your understanding that, because Brooklyn is an interesting name here, is it your understanding that maybe in conversations for Dennis Schroeder, there might have been some larger deals where at least ideas were swapped, and that Brooklyn is interested in Jonathan Kuminga, but that's kind of what held it up?
No, I think what was talked about, and I think it's been reported there as far as what's the availability of Dorian Finney-Smith and Cam Johnson. I think that's, and I don't think, you're not trading Jonathan Kuminga for Cam Johnson. No offense. I think that's kind of, I think those were if you're looking at, maybe 2 potential targets that maybe you could have tried to make the deal a little bit bigger and it just didn't work out. Those were probably the 2 names. I haven't heard Kuminga at all linked to Brooklyn as far as in a trade.
When you think about other selling teams, is it too early to put Chicago in that bucket? Because a lot of fans out here have their eyes on Vucevic as a nice stretch 5 that Golden State would be covetous of. Are we still too early in the process to really start to tab some of these teams as sellers?
Yeah, I mean, Chicago's in an interesting spot just because they owe their first to San Antonio. If it falls out of the top 10, and if you look at the track record of them over the last 3 years, there's been an incentive to make the play-in. I don't see that changing much here. As far as I know, they've kind of got a little bit younger here with certainly with making a Josh Giddey trade and how they've added in the draft here. But it's hard for me to even if they get a first-round pick and they're taking 2 expiring contracts back to kind of move off Vucevic, who's really having one of his better years.
Bobby, back to Jimmy Butler. You said this would be complex. Maybe it would take a lot of players. Let's say the Warriors were interested in Jimmy Butler. How
Sure.
would that deal look and work?
Yeah. I mean, you're basically you're looking at certainly Wiggins because it's the big number. At $26 million, you've got some expirings with Payton and Looney. I think they get you to another $18 million. So you're getting close to that $48 million. Probably another player involved. As far as I don't know, would it be Kuminga? Would it be Podziemski? Maybe. You've got up to 3 first-round picks you could trade. You probably got a third team that you would have to move one of those players to. You got to be comfortable paying Jimmy Butler. when he's going to be 36 years old in September on a $50 million per year contract? I think that's the big if, too. That's a big question mark. Are you willing to do that? Is Miami willing to take back Wiggins? So there's a lot of but that's kind of what a structure. Schroeder could be traded February 5th if you want to go down that road. Probably you don't. I think Dennis would be really good for them. But that's kind of what a structure would look like.
You know what I'm hearing, Bobby, that I think would be surprising to Warrior fans is a lot of and I'm not going to call them proposals, but just these ideas that we're sitting here swapping sound like they don't include Kuminga. And I think Warrior fans are at least cruising around today thinking to themselves, that's what the other teams are going to want. Do you believe the Warriors can maneuver at the deadline, make big swings, and keep Jonathan?
I think with the players that we're talking about right now, whether it be Butler, and I think certainly Ingram, and I haven't heard anything with Golden State linked to Ingram. I think you can keep Kuminga and potentially if you're willing to basically give up. I think that the draft equity certainly is important here. I think it's a matter of what's important to Miami. What's important. They're not a team that takes a step back and builds through the draft. So what's important to them from a player standpoint here? But I think that would be the end goal as far as if you're trying to do a deal and try to keep Kuminga from being involved in it.
Have things become so untenable between Butler and Miami that him being traded is almost a fait accompli?
I don't think so. Listen, I think once they didn't extend him this offseason, and he's still extension eligible for 2 for $113. I think they knew there was going to be some noise. Certainly we get to mid-December. They'd been playing pretty well before they lost to Detroit. It's not a distraction. If you look at it, I think the Butler rumors were going to be here the whole year. It just kind of pops in the last week here. He hasn't asked to be traded. The report that Sham said that if he were traded, these were the 4 teams that he would prefer to go to. I think it's definitely something to monitor if they do lose some games here. But he was great the other night in Detroit. I think it was probably his best game of the year. So that doesn't signal a guy who wants out. It more signals a guy that wants to get paid and who's going to be, as I said, 36 years old in September.
Bobby, what's your sense on just kind of the timing of the deadline as a whole and any large moves? The Warriors were so active right away when they could to go get Schroeder. So is your thought that something could be more imminent, or is this more a late January, early February thing?
I think the Dennis Schroeder thing was unique in a sense that D'Anthony Melton's trade restriction expired on Sunday. Brooklyn was in a position where, let's face it, the more games they won with Dennis Schroeder, the worse it was for them. Because you don't trade to reacquire your first-round pick in 2025 to be the the last play-in team here. And I think moving off him, I think there was more of a priority to move off Dennis Schroeder in mid-December than early February here, just based on how competitive they've been here. I don't see that as much in other situations here. I do think we last year there was 20 out of 27 trades that happened the week of the deadline week. I still think I'm leaning more towards that you see more action once we get to mid January and then closer to February 6th.
Tough to have a trade conversation without the requisite pie in the sky LeBron James portion of the conversation. Do you think there's any possibility that LeBron decides that he's had it and he'll take not only his talents but his son as well to a different destination such as Golden State?
Yeah, listen, I've seen crazier, well, maybe not that crazy, but I've seen crazy things in this league happen, and I wrote it in we have a trade primer out today, and the last thing for the Lakers was, listen, if they don't play well, and I know they won a couple of games here, and things really fall off the tracks, probably not, would he waive his no trade clause and ask to be moved? I mean, I think it's a fair question if they are in the outside of the play-in here. So I think like last year, right? Let's kind of monitor it. Let's see where it is. I think if they're winning, then no. Maybe even if they're not winning, he still is content as far as being there.
Bobby, what would you say is the likelihood of a sizable Warriors deal? What would you do? What do you think makes sense for them?
Oh, yeah, listen, I think David Griffin said it the best, the now Pelicans GM, and this is when he was in Cleveland, is that when you have the Babe Ruth of basketball, and he was talking about LeBron at the time, you do everything possible to maximize the window. I think the same what Denver is trying to do with Nikola Jokic, who's a little, certainly younger than Steph Curry, but I think you're, and I think the West is probably a little bit more wide open than people thought. But I think I am trying to do as much as I can. But I always say it takes two to tango to get a deal done, and then it's the rule. As I said, the rules of the CBA are extremely, extremely challenging here. So I think Mike will be extremely aggressive if the opportunity presents itself, because I think the goal is to try to upgrade this roster. If you're willing to give up some things that could impact you in the future.
Bobby, this is great stuff, man. We really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Okay, Bobby Marks, ESPN.